Margaret was 83 when she passed. She'd lived alone for 22 years. People thought of her as quiet, unremarkable, the kind of woman you pass on the sidewalk and nod at, and by the time you reach your car, you've already forgotten her face. Then the attorney stood up at the service and began reading the list. 3 families' rents covered during the 2018 layoffs. 17 students' school lunches, paid for years, anonymously. A library's entire budget funded for a decade. No one in the room had known any of it. Not one person. I want to ask you something before we go any further. Think about the people around you right now. The ones who seem ordinary. The ones who don't take up much space. The quiet ones. What do you actually know about them? Because Margaret's story isn't really about Margaret. It's about what we miss. What we're too busy to notice. What's been there all along, holding things together, silently, without asking for anything in return. Let's go back to the beginning. Margaret Eleanor Whitfield was born in 1940 in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio. She came from the kind of family that didn't talk about money, not because there wasn't enough of it, but because talking about it was considered a form of weakness. You worked, you managed, you didn't complain, and if you had a little extra, you didn't wave it around. That was private. That was between you and God. Her father ran a small machine shop. Her mother worked part-time at a dry cleaner. Neither of them finished high school, but both of them had an understanding of what it meant to be a decent person that most college graduates never fully arrive at. You kept your word. You looked after people without making a production of it. You showed up. Those were the rules. Margaret absorbed all of it. She married at 26. A man named Robert, a high school history teacher with a dry sense of humor and a habit of underlining passages in books and then never going back to read his own notes. They were together for 35 years. No children, not a wound, not a failure, just a different shape of a life, chosen quietly and without apology. Robert died in 2001. Fast, no warning. A Tuesday morning in November, coffee on the table, plans for the weekend, and then he was gone. She was 61. She had more than 2 decades ahead of her, though she didn't think of it that way. She just had tomorrow. And then the day after that. People in town watched her in the months that followed. Grief does strange things to people, and everyone was waiting to see what it would do to Margaret. Some expected her to fade, to become one of those widows who get smaller every year until one day nobody can quite remember when they stopped seeing them. That's not what happened. What happened was quieter than that, and it would take 22 years for anyone to understand it. She started walking more. To the library, to the diner, to the hardware store on 5th Street, owned by a family named Birch who had 4 kids and a furnace that always needed fixing and a look about them. Some months of people who weren't sure they'd make it to the end of the year. She remembered names. She asked about people's mothers, their surgeries, their kids' school plays, with the kind of precision that comes not from a good memory, but from actually listening, from caring, from treating every conversation as if the person in front of you was the only person in the world for those few minutes. People liked her. They thought of her as kind, sweet even, the quiet old woman who always remembered your daughter's name. But nobody was paying close enough attention to what she was actually doing. She wasn't just walking. She wasn't just listening. She was watching. She was learning exactly where the weight was pressing down on people's lives, and she was calculating, patiently, methodically, with a precision that would eventually stun everyone who knew her, where she could put her shoulder against it, without anyone seeing, without anyone knowing, without asking for a single thing in return. Here's what the will described, and I want you to hear it the way the people in that room heard it, one item at a time. Slowly, each one landing like a stone dropped into still water. In 2018, when the Riverside manufacturing plant announced 340 layoffs in 11 days, 3 families in town quietly began receiving anonymous money orders. Every month, for 14 months. Enough to cover rent. Enough to keep the utilities on. Enough so that dinner didn't have to be explained to the children. None of those families ever connected the money to anyone. They assumed, the way people assume in situations like that it must have come from some church fund, some local charity, some faceless institution with a budget line for emergencies. It came from Margaret's personal checking account, handwritten requests, routed through her attorney with strict instructions that her name was never to appear anywhere near the transaction. For 9 years, she contacted the school district's lunch office every August and paid a lump sum to cover the accounts of children who couldn't afford to eat during the school day. 17 students over those years, some cycling in, some cycling out as family situations changed. The woman who ran the program knew there was an anonymous donor. She had no idea who. She said, years later, that she had assumed it was a local business. She had actually once thanked a local business for it at a town meeting, by mistake. Margaret had been sitting in the back of that room. She said nothing. She went home and made soup. The library, the one she walked to twice a week for 2 decades. In 2009, when the budget crisis hit and the board was 17 days from eliminating the children's section entirely, a certified check arrived. No name, no note, just the exact amount needed to keep the department running for 12 months. Then another check the following year, and another, for 10 years. There were smaller things. A nursing student who received a card in the mail with a check inside and no return address. A family whose only car broke down during a winter storm, who found, the next morning, an envelope in their mailbox with the exact cost of the repair, down to the dollar. How she knew the amount, no one has ever determined. And here is the part that I keep coming back to. She had thought all of this through, not in a haphazard way, not the way most people are generous, impulsively, emotionally, in the moment. She had systems. She had a quiet infrastructure of giving that she had spent years refining so that it left absolutely no trace back to her. She had chosen anonymity the way an engineer chooses a material, not for sentiment, but for its properties, for what it could do that nothing else could. Because Margaret had understood something early on, something that most of us resist understanding for as long as possible, that the moment you put your name on a gift, you've changed it. Subtly, invisibly, but changed it. There is now a small return transaction baked into the act, a quiet expectation, a waiting for the thank you that you've told yourself you don't need. She didn't want gratitude. She wanted the thing itself, pure, unencumbered, clean. The service was held on a Thursday afternoon in October. About 80 people came. The church was the one Margaret had attended for 40 years, though she'd always sat near the back and had never once joined a committee or volunteered to organize a single bake sale, which, in retrospect, says something. The attorney's name was Gerald Harmon. He'd worked with Margaret for 15 years. He knew what was in the will. He had known for a while, and he had never told a soul. Not his wife, not his secretary. He had kept it the way she'd asked him to, sealed, silent, until this moment. He stood up after the eulogy. He adjusted his glasses. He said, "Margaret left specific instructions that this be read here, in this room, in this way." And then he began. The first item, the 3 families during the layoffs, landed quietly. A few people exchanged glances. Someone whispered. One of the women from those families was actually sitting in the 3rd pew. She didn't move. She just put her hand over her mouth and held it there. By the 3rd or 4th item, the room had changed. That's the only way to describe it. The temperature didn't drop. Nobody cried out. But something shifted, like the air had gotten heavier, or like everyone's breathing had gotten slower, more careful, more deliberate. By the time Gerald read the part about the school lunches, 9 years, 17 children, a man in the back made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. And then he put his face in his hands. Because that man was Jim Caldwell. And Jim Caldwell's son had been one of the 17. Jim had worked at that same plant that did the layoffs. He'd made it through. Barely. But there had been a year, maybe 2, when things were genuinely desperate. He had never known his son's lunches were being paid for. His son hadn't mentioned it, probably because children don't frame those things the way adults do. Someone at school had just said it was handled. So it was handled. Jim had spent years thinking his son had somehow qualified for a standard assistance program. He'd felt guilty about it, off and on. Guilty about taking something he wasn't sure his family deserved. He'd never looked into it more than that. Just quietly grateful, quietly ashamed, quietly moving on. And now he was sitting in a church pew listening to an attorney tell him that the woman he'd nodded at in the grocery store for 2 decades, the small, quiet woman he'd maybe exchanged 30 words with in his entire life, had been the one holding his son's dignity together during the hardest years his family had known. He had no category for that. None of them did. Because what the room was experiencing wasn't just the revelation of generosity. It was the collision of 2 realities that had existed side by side for decades without ever touching. The Margaret they thought they knew, and the Margaret who had actually been there, all along, doing something none of them would ever have imagined. And the collision left everyone asking the same quiet, unsettling question. Who else is like this? Who else have I been walking past? There's a question worth sitting with here, and I don't think it has a clean, comfortable answer. Why do people do this? Not just give, but give this way, with this level of care around being unseen? The easy answer is humility, and it's not wrong, but it's incomplete. Because humility, as most of us practice it or perform it, still contains a witness. The humble person is still aware of being watched. They wave off the compliment. They say it was nothing. They redirect the credit. But the audience is still there. The self-effacement is still a kind of statement made in front of someone. Margaret removed the audience entirely. That's different. That's not humility as a virtue on display. That's something else. I think what she understood, and what most of us only half understand at best, is that recognition changes the act from the inside out. Not just for the person receiving it, for the person giving it. When you know someone will find out you gave, even when you're not giving specifically for that reason, there's still a quiet satisfaction available to you. The knowledge that they'll know, that you'll be seen as a certain kind of person. That's not shameful. That's human. That's how most generous acts work. They feel good partly because they position you, in your own mind and eventually in others' eyes, as someone worth admiring. Margaret didn't want to feel like a certain kind of person. She wanted to do a certain kind of thing. And there's a distance between those two goals that is much wider than it sounds. She told Gerald Harmon once, years before she died, that anonymous giving felt cleaner. That was the word she used. Cleaner. Not more noble. Not more spiritual. Cleaner. As if recognition were a residue that contaminated something she wanted kept pure. And I think there's something else there too. Something quieter. When nobody knows you gave, nobody can take it from you. Nobody can diminish it with a comment or make it political or complicated or turn it into a story about themselves. It stays yours, fully, completely yours, in a way that no public gift ever quite manages to remain. She gave in secret, and the secret was, in part, a gift to herself. Not a selfish one, a self-protective one, a way of keeping something intact, a way of keeping something honest. And I think about how we talk about giving now. The posts, the tag donations, the public pledges. And I'm not here to condemn any of that. People do real good through visible means, and visibility can inspire. But Margaret's way of moving through the world puts a question in the room that doesn't go away. What portion of your goodness do you keep private? Not because you're ashamed of it, but because some things lose a quality the moment they're witnessed. Like a conversation that changes the instant you realize someone is recording it. What do you do that no one will ever know about? That's the question she spent 22 years answering, quietly, methodically, without ever once putting it into words. We live in a time when visibility feels like proof, when the thing you did doesn't fully count, doesn't fully exist, until someone has seen it and reflected it back to you. I don't say that as a criticism. I say it because it's the water we swim in. It's built into every platform, every feed, every notification that tells you someone noticed. Our lives have become, to a strange and uncomfortable degree, something we perform as much as we live. And most of us know it. We feel the tension. The moment when you're doing something good and you catch yourself thinking about how you'd frame it later. The moment you realize you've stopped doing something because there's no clean way to make it visible. No story that lands right in the telling. Margaret didn't live in the exact same world we do. But human nature doesn't change that fast. The desire to be seen, known, acknowledged, that's old. That's ancient. And she lived in a small town, which is its own kind of social pressure. People knew each other. Reputations traveled. She could have received considerable quiet credit through the right channels. She could have let her name be attached to the library donation. She could have let the Birch family know it was her who helped. She chose not to. Repeatedly. For decades. That's not an accident. That's a philosophy. And what makes her story feel like it belongs to a different era, even though it doesn't, is how rare that philosophy is. How much it actually costs, in the daily practice of it, to do good things and simply leave them there. No receipt, no record, no moment of recognition to store for a harder day when you need to remind yourself that you're a person worth something. Most of us give partly to have something to look back on, something to point to. I was there. I helped. I mattered during that chapter. Margaret gave. And then she went home and made soup. And she didn't look back at it. It was a thing she had done. The next thing was something else. That's an unusual relationship with your own goodness. To do something that's significant, to change a family's year, to keep a child fed, to save a building full of books, and then just set it down. Not carry it, not wear it, not even remember it on the days when you need to feel like enough. She trusted, it seems, that the doing was sufficient, that the effect would hold whether she was aware of it or not. And here's what I keep thinking about. The families who received her help, they'd been carrying something for years without knowing its source. A warmth, a relief, the strange, inexplicable sense that someone had seen them during a hard time. You know that feeling? When something good happens and you can't trace it back, so the gratitude just floats, directed upward, into the air, toward whatever you believe might be listening. That's where their gratitude had been living. Diffuse, unnamed, and now it had a face. An 83-year-old woman with gray hair who walked to the library on Thursdays. Ordinary, unremarkable, until the moment she was neither. If you've made it this far with me, I want to invite you to subscribe to our channel and join us every day. Because this is what we do here. We find the stories that don't trend, that the algorithm ignores, that don't fit in a headline, and we sit with them long enough to let them mean something. If Margaret's story has stayed with you this far, you're in the right place. Stay with us. And now, back to her. Because the story doesn't end with the reading of the will. What happened in that town in the weeks after the service was something quieter than a celebration, and harder than grief. It was more like a reckoning, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that finds you at the kitchen table, or on the drive home, or in the middle of a conversation about something else entirely. People started talking, not loudly, at the diner, in the parking lot, over the fence. Conversations that started with Margaret and drifted, slowly, towards something more uncomfortable. Something closer to home. What have I been missing? Who in my life is holding something together that I'm not paying attention to? Who have I written off as unremarkable simply because unremarkable was what I expected to find? One of the town council members, a man who'd been in local politics for 20 years, the kind of man who knew everyone's name and considered that a form of civic virtue, said publicly at the next board meeting that he had been profoundly embarrassed. Not by Margaret, by himself. By 2 decades of looking at his community and believing he understood it while a woman was quietly doing more for it than any policy he'd ever voted on. That's a hard thing to say out loud, an even harder thing to actually mean. What Margaret had done, without ever intending it, without a manifesto or a letter of explanation, was create a mirror. Her will was a mirror. It showed a town the gap between who they thought they were and who they actually were. Between the generosity they imagined surrounded them and the generosity that had, in fact, been present, alone, unnamed, and singular. There's a word for what she did. Not saint, not hero. Those words push her away. They make her into something you can admire from a comfortable distance without feeling any particular pressure yourself. The word I keep returning to is faithful. She was faithful to something, to a private, unwavering understanding of what a life was for. Of what giving meant when you took the audience away, of who you could become, slowly and quietly, over decades, if you kept showing up for people and never once demanded that the world take notice. That's a demanding kind of life, actually. Not painful, but demanding. It requires something most of us haven't practiced. It requires contentment without confirmation, enoughness without evidence, the willingness to do the thing and let the thing be the whole reward. Most of us are still learning that. Some of us haven't started yet. Margaret had been practicing it for 22 years by the time anyone found out. Here's what I want to leave you with, and I'll say it plainly because I don't think it needs decoration. Margaret didn't change the world. She didn't invent anything. She didn't lead a movement or write a book or give a speech that people quote decades later. She lived in a small town in Ohio, and she walked to the library on Thursdays, and she kept her own counsel, and she paid attention, really paid attention. And she quietly, methodically, put her resources where they would do the most good for the people who needed it most. For 22 years, without telling anyone. And when she was gone, the town felt it. Not because she had been important in the way we usually mean that word, but because she had been present. Actually present. The kind of presence that leaves a mark so subtle you don't notice it's there until it's gone. I think about the families. The ones who got those money orders in 2018. They're still there. Living their lives, going to the grocery store, passing people on the sidewalk. And they now know, they will always know, That one of those ordinary-looking people was the reason they kept their house during the worst year of their lives. What do you do with that knowledge? How does it change the way you look at the person in front of you at the checkout line? The neighbor you've never quite gotten around to knowing? The woman who sits near the back at the service and doesn't join any committees? I think that's the real inheritance Margaret left behind. Not the money. The money was used as it was meant to be. The inheritance is the question that Gerald Harmon put into that room when he sat down and the silence came. Who else? Who else is doing something extraordinary in the spaces I'm not looking? Who have I dismissed as ordinary when ordinary is precisely the wrong word? That question doesn't have a comfortable answer, because if you let it actually land, it asks something of you. It asks you to look more carefully, to resist the reflex of assuming you already know what someone's life contains, to slow down long enough to consider that the person in front of you might be holding something together, for you, for someone you love, for someone you've never met, without your knowledge, without your thanks, without needing either. Margaret lived like she believed that every quiet life was full of things she couldn't see, and her response to that belief wasn't admiration from a distance. It was action, consistent, patient, anonymous action. That's what she practiced. That's what she got very, very good at. The question she leaves behind isn't about her. It's about you. What will your will say? Not the legal document, the life. The one you're writing right now. In the choices nobody's watching. In the things you do when there's no story to attach them to. In the weight you decide to carry for someone else without asking them to know. If this one stayed with you. If something in Margaret's story touched something in yours, share it with 5 people who need to hear it. Not for us, for them. Subscribe to the channel if you want to keep finding stories like this one. We're here every day. And leave a comment. Tell us something real. Tell us about someone in your life who was quietly extraordinary. Someone like Margaret, who did the right thing when no one was watching. Or tell us what story you want us to find next. That comment might be the most honest thing you write anywhere this week. Margaret would have disagreed, but she was never one for giving herself too much credit.